here we are on YouTube. So I want to say big hi to everyone and happy Pride. We're here to celebrate Dublin Pride and specifically their week of Machnamh, I think it's pronounced, where we reflect and we think about the community, and that's why we are having our bi panel where we're going to discuss all things bi-ness and have a bit of a reflection about what being bi means to each of us, the challenges it sometimes brings up, and the stereotypes and erasures we unfortunately have to meet along the way when we're dealing with this. Now, I'm so lucky to have I can't even count right now, four wonderful people with me today, and we'll have another person join us later. I just want to say I'm your host, Keir, one of the volunteers in Bi Ireland, and I want to introduce you to Hannah.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Mac. I identify as bi or bi plus. I am from Belfast and I volunteer with Bi Ireland as in Belfast. I'm also chronically ill. I have a partner and we live between Belfast and Dublin. And I volunteer with Bi Ireland, and also I'm the co-chair of the Pride Now at my workplace.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. And Paula, can I get your introduction, please?
I'm Paula. My pronouns are she, her. I volunteer with Bi Ireland. I also volunteer with Scene in Kerry. I'm usually spending far too much time on the internet. I sometimes speak with my hands, which, depending on the angle of my camera, may or may not be visible. So I'm just giving you a heads up. I speak with my hands a lot. I'm from Dublin, but I've been living in Kerry for 8 years now. I moved to Kerry when I met my now husband on Twitter. So that happened.
Brilliant, thank you. And next we have the beautiful Tendai.
Hi everybody, my name is Tendai. My pronouns are they, she. I would identify as bi plus or pansexual, and I'm a chronically ill person. I have a lot of things going on all the time, but I just have to make it work. And I volunteer with Bi Plus Ireland, and I have done so for quite a while. And I also help out with other minority groups too.
Brilliant, thank you. And for our last introduction at the moment, Claire, would you like to say something?
Hi, I'm Claire. My pronouns are she, she. I identify as bi plus. I go between bisexual and pansexual. I am gender fluid. I have a rare form of epilepsy and I have high function autism and I have a lot of chronic pain.
Brilliant. So we all fall under the bi umbrella and we all suffer from chronic illnesses is what I'm hearing so far. That's brilliant. Now, I want to just start off by, for those people in our lovely YouTube audience that may not know what bisexuality is or why we refer to it as bi plus rather than bisexuality. By Ireland, we took the decision to call it bi plus as we were recognizing the bi umbrella and all the sexual and romantic attractions that can fall underneath that. So bi plus is the attraction to two or more genders, whether that be sexual or romantic. So here's where we get into the elephant a lot of the times in the internet world. Why do some of us identify as pansexual and some of us identify as bi? Would any of the pansexuals like to comment?
Sure, I'll go. For me, it was a case of I identified as bi since I was about 12 years old, so I was quite young, and at that time, I was only really aware of two binary genders. So, and that was what I was told, that if you liked the same gender and you liked the opposite gender, it made you bisexual. So I got very cozy in that bi label. And obviously, as life evolved and I learned more about gender identity, I was then like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's still bi because it can mean two or more. However, a lot of people were still very staunchly in bisexual meaning hetero attracted, like being attracted to hetero people opposite from you and people the same as you. So that kind of muddied the waters for me. So it had me questioning, am I bisexual then or am I pansexual? But bi has always been more comfortable for me. It's just always rolled off the tongue a lot better. But if I have to clarify where I am in my bi-ness, I will say I am pansexual. Gender has no relevance to me whatsoever. But bisexual, bi plus is just always easier for me because I've been saying it since I was 12. So it's an old dog, new trick sort of thing.
That's fair. Anybody else have anything to say about the bi-pan conversation?
Yeah, I would probably agree with Tenda. I think I was the same. I was probably around 11 or 12 when I learned what the word bisexual meant. And I was that age in 2005. So it was a long time ago. So back then, you're totally right. We didn't have the same, understanding or language outside of bi, meaning I like boys and girls and that's it. But I still really resonated with that label. Came out at around 11 and then was very much back in the closet until I was in my 20s. Then when I joined Bi Ireland a couple of years ago, sort of learned a lot more in fluidity, and my bi-ness isn't limited to two genders or two binary genders. It probably does identify as well, but I still, like you said, and I'm more comfortable with that bi plus label or that bi label because that's what I learned and grew up with, and that feels more me. And I think the flag is very me as well. It goes with palette, so yeah, I feel like I identify with that, but not because I don't identify with pansexual. I still feel like I am attracted to everyone regardless of their gender, and either suits me fine.
Brilliant. I think that is the experience of so many of the people we talk to in Bi Ireland, Bi Plus Ireland, on a regular basis, especially in our support groups. And for those people that may not be aware at home, our Bi umbrella is large. These are only just a few examples of the different attraction levels that there is under the bi umbrella, but it is large. Somehow the debate always seems to be between bisexuality and pansexuality, probably because they're the two biggest ones, but it is a large umbrella with many attractions underneath it. Interestingly enough, in Ireland, people under 25 are more likely to identify as pansexual than any other sexuality, according to the latest Belong To survey. Thanks, all yous, for saying that. So, how's Pride going for everyone? We're like 5 days into Pride, but how's it going?
I panicked.
I'm exhausted already.
I'm not going to lie, I panicked when you asked, and then you emphasized we were only 5 days in and went, oh, it's okay that I haven't done anything yet. My instinct was I have done nothing so far.
That's fair. This is the second By Ireland Pride event of today, so I was a bit shocked that it's only 5 days in so far.
That I can understand.
I always find it a bit strange because we have our Pride at the start of August. So Pride month isn't really Pride month for us. I feel it starts in June and finishes at the end of August because it's like an entire Pride summer. So although in work we're doing a lot of Pride month activities, in Belfast the activities don't start until later on. And we just had LGBT awareness week of May. So I think all of the Pride activities are all melting into one, and I'm exhausted already.
Yeah, I haven't done much yet, but I have a lot planned. The only thing I've done so far is I went into Carol's and Penny's and bought 2 flags. But Carol's are the official sponsor for Dublin Pride, so I made sure that my money was going to Dublin Pride and not the corporates.
That's totally fair. It is nice to see how much rainbow capitalism there is at the moment, if that's what you want. It's nice to see how many places are actually donating back to different organizations. That's what's really nice, because I know Penny's is donating back to IGLA. They're donating £120,000 to IGLA, so that's nice, you know, this type of way. Sorry, how's it going for you?
Most of my Pride has been spent giving out about rainbow capitalism. To be honest, it's because it's so much this year, I find. And it's just kind of exploded. It wasn't like a gradual Sorlita. It's like everywhere I look now, every logo on my phone is like almost rainbow. And it's just like, oh, okay, fine. Like I knew this time was coming, but it's like they just really ramped it up on the 1st of June, which is fine. You know, it's Pride season. But yeah, my excuse me, my first few days has been spent giving out side-eyeing a lot of companies like, didn't you just have some tough behavior recently? But at the end of the day, a lot of these things, they eventually lead to a change in how it's seen in the mainstream. So sometimes you have to take everything with a bit of salt, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, that's the lesson I learned this year anyway. Last year I was very, very anti-capitalism, and then this year I was listening to more people, especially people that weren't used to seeing like shirts and stuff in their stores, being so happy. And I was like, oh yeah, hold on. I'm lucky that I live in Dublin, so I would have it very normalized, you know, this type of way. So as much as we do not like the rainbow capitalism, those of us here that I have talked to about this, I'm not saying all people, but it is still nice that people get the option where they may not have. So at saying that, let's all support our queer creators when we can. So tell me, what's the thing you love and hate most about Pride?
I love the community spirit. I feel there's a lot of there's a lot of community spirit, people looking out for one another, and the celebration of Pride, the celebration of who we are. So that's what I really love about it. And even with COVID, like, we've managed to celebrate it together but apart.
I feel the same way. I feel Pride, especially joining the march. For the past few years, I've been marching with By Ireland, and despite being invited by my co-workers to come and march with work, like my heart is with my community and with my people. And I will always march by Ireland. And although saying that, one of the community organizer is that you spend so much time organizing and being the activist and getting everybody together, then you're exhausted, and then it's hard to enjoy the day because you've spent all this time organizing, and little about how a few of us have chronic illnesses. So that can be extra difficult if you're somebody with a chronic illness. So the last physical Pride, 19, because I don't even know what year it is now, but I couldn't even take part in that Pride because I had recently had surgery for one of my conditions. So I had to be the supporter sitting on the sidelines for a change, and denying I was just waving my bi flag from the side of the road. So it was a bit of a different experience to be, not participating and not organizing. So yeah, it's very interesting. So not sure what Belfast Pride will look like on in the year, but probably lots of virtual things, which is still great because it increases the accessibility as well.
Yeah, I marched with Aspire in 2019, and I was only out of hospital a few days. The day was really, really good, and I really, really enjoyed it. But oh my God, I was so exhausted at the end of it. Like,
Yeah, for me, I suppose my favorite thing would be, again, I think that has been said, the community spirit. One of the things I loved most about last year, and saying you loved anything about last year is weird. I am aware of this, okay? But one of the things I loved the most was when we realized that prides couldn't happen. The amount of local and rural prides who joined together to go, well, let's just all make the biggest online pride we can think of, if you know what I mean. So it was that kind of, even through us, in a year where we weren't able to see each other, when possibly Pride could have been the least thing any of us were concerned about, it became, I think it took on a bigger significance for me because it became much more about community care. It was very much like, no, we need Pride now more than we ever did, if you know what I mean. So if it has to be online, it has to be online. So yeah, that's, I think for me, it's always the community spirit, but I do think there is a special kind of connection between the smaller prides with each other, if you know what I mean. I'm similar to Hannah. Pride in Kerry or Cork. We haven't had a Pride parade in Kerry since 2015. Obviously we had plans on having a parade last year, but COVID happened, so it was online. But yeah, Pride season here is you're well into the summer as well, so there is always that the extension of the joy, if you know what I mean. Kind of, I suppose the way I look at it is when Pride season lasts beyond June, some of it, because as we were talking about rainbow capitalism earlier on, they've all given up because June has ended, if you know what I mean. Like the ones who are really only in it for, it's June, and come the end of June, that's us done, we'll change our logo again. I think you really get to see the true, from a rainbow capitalism point of view, the ones who care slightly more than the rest is, they'll realize the Pride season in Ireland extends much further than June, if you know what I mean.
I definitely agree with Paula there. One of my favorite parts, though, of Pride is there's been quite an increase in inclusivity with Pride overall. So for me, growing up, Pride had it had a look, and it never looked like me. It never looked like people like me, but in more recent years, it's gotten better and better. And with it going online last year, it's just the diversity I've seen and the people celebrating in so many different ways, or even just panels like this, where you're seeing more and more different faces, you're hearing different perspectives. That's been my favorite part overall. I'm always here for diversity, and I'm always like trying to like shoehorn it in everywhere, because it shouldn't be a thing that it's not everywhere. Because there's people living all over the world who look so different from one another. And that's been my favorite part, just seeing people who look like me and being able to take like my Nieblings. I brought them to Pride in 2019. We marched with Bi Plus, And it was just such a lovely feeling because I went down with my partner and it was so lovely seeing them having fun. They would not stop talking about it on the way home. And it was just such a wonderful, wonderful experience because, yes, it's still a family event. And there were people wearing all sorts of things. So one thing I haven't liked about it this year is the discourse in tone policing around certain groups at Pride, which makes no sense whatsoever to me. No sense. Because those people were there at the beginning. So now by saying, oh no, my children can't see that, or that doesn't belong at Pride, that's not sitting right with me at all.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too.
You've all made very valid points. I have to say I'm loving all these Pride events online because being disabled, it's just nice not to have to leave the house. If I'm feeling sick, I still get to be part of Pride events. And we talk so much about Pride as if the event of Pride is the parade. And I know it is, but there's so much more to Pride. And I think the online event has helped reinforce that. We got a comment in from Selena, I think it's pronounced, saying they so agree with the inclusivity is so important. So yeah.
Yeah, inclusivity is really, really important because there are people with various types of disabilities out there. And then also rainbow families are grown in Ireland as well. So like you have to try and make it like a family event as well, which Dublin Pride and all prides around the country are doing, you know, and you'd be able to bring your kids to it, and you'd be able to bring the family. Like it can be a family event. And I loved the quiet space in 2019. I sat in the quiet space after the parade, and it was great.
I know, though, one thing I hate about Pride is the bi-erasure that we often face around Pride. I know, Paula, you particularly have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this.
I have very, very, anyone who's heard me before knows I tend to rant, so I'll try not to actually rant. I'll try to be coherent this time. I think that's one of the, I suppose for most of us, if not all of us, I dread June for this very reason. But a thing I was chatting to a friend yesterday, because they were just checking in on me, because they were aware how I kind of get during June for this reason. And we were chatting, and it was a throwaway comment they made, but they were like, the fact that this discussion only ever happens in June in its own right is the biggest act of bi-erasure, because they act like we don't exist the other 11 months of the year. But then in June, suddenly we exist, but not in the correct way because we shouldn't be there. And I come from this from, I suppose, the perspective of I'm married to a man, so my relationship is seen as straight. If you know what I mean. So I am very much viewed as, well, you really don't belong here, you're straight, if you know what I mean. So, and that in its own right, I have complicated feelings about, because I am aware that on a base level, my instinct is, no, you've erased my sexuality, therefore that's, we won't be doing that. But I am also aware that there is like a nuance to it where, I suppose, I do pass as straight, and while I'm not straight, and that erasure is difficult to deal with, in certain circumstances, actually in almost all circumstances, it is safer for me to walk down the street. So I do kind of hold those two things together, if you know what I mean. And I think they get really complicated in June, because I suppose like my experience of bi-erasure in particular is in that situation where my instinct is to, I suppose, launch into a big spiel about why you're wrong, which most of the time people are. But I do also have the nuance of, yeah, but in this moment, I am, I suppose, my personal circumstance, there is like two sides of it, where currently I am safer because I know I don't have to stop and think, even at Pride, if you know what I mean, about whether it's safe to walk around the corner or not. And I know, I suppose my thing as well is the other side of that coin, is that even, you know, by people, pan people, you know, other identities under the umbrella, when they're in relationships that I suppose while mine is seen as straight, other relationships are often, you know, our sexuality, for particularly during June, is, you know, people take one look at our partner and then decide our sexuality based on what they've decided about our partner. And sometimes that's not even the correct, you know, the assumption, and that is wrong in its own right. But I suppose the other side of that is for people who are whose relationship is seen as either gay or lesbian. You know, that's, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that's erasure, but I don't, that's a different kind of erasure than I experience. And while overall it's all by erasure, I think something that I've kind of realized in the last couple of years, I think quite a lot of the discussion around the erasure, more of it is given to people in my situation, if you know what I mean. Like I hear much more from people like me who are assumed to be straight. And I suppose I'm conscious of, you know, that's not everyone's experience, if you know what I mean. I would imagine quite a lot of people, their experiences, their assumption about their sexuality is still wrong, but they're not assumed to be straight. So there's that, you know, that I suppose that wide-ranging thing of, I suppose for me, I just want to scream at people, why are you making assumptions in the first place? Can you not just, you know, there's a person, we're at Pride, we'll, you know, it's just not assume anything. But I'm aware we live in a world where everything is assumed, if you know what I mean. And the starting point, the default position is we're all straight till we'll tell someone we're not. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose for me, the biggest thing around the erasure is, it's that, sorry, I had to take a breath there because it's so exhausting. Because you know what's happening, you know what's coming. And like I said, it's worse in June because for 11 months of the year, we don't exist, which, you know, at least they're quiet about it. In June, they're in my face, if you know what I mean. It's difficult to, it's much more difficult to avoid. Because if you're at Pride, you're in a situation where it happens, if you know what I mean. And you never know when it's going to happen. I mean, even marching behind the Buy Ireland banner a few times, I've gotten comments, you know, throwaway comments that, you know, I'm sure they meant as a joke, but, you know, they weren't funny. You know, of, you know, why any of us were there, like why the banner was there, like why, you know, what were we doing, kind of a thing. You know, could we all not just pick a side to go the really obvious way, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I think Pride is, I suppose, is that time of year when the by erasure, no, more accurately, the discourse is at its worst. The erasure is just more, I think, prominent. It's not to say it doesn't happen. Yeah, the discourse is worse in June.
Definitely agree with Paula, and I've experienced it myself, and it's so difficult to deal with because yes, as if you're in a heteronormative appearing couple, you don't have that same level of fear of, okay, I'm going to go and get the bus home. Will I be okay with my partner? We don't have that fear if we're with someone who appears to be a man. And because of that, it's almost like we're pushed aside because our struggles aren't as bad. Whereas you'd have bi people who are in homo appearing couples where they would be more easily accepted into the pride arms of, yes, we all understand the struggle, because they're in those type of couples that look like you get the struggle. We get the struggle too. We just don't look like it. I've also gotten different looks, just me being a Pride, because it's very rare to see people of color, especially in Dublin Pride. They're few and far between, and you get the odd, oh, it's almost like I didn't know sort of thing, and it's just, there's always a slight level of ignorance with that. So when you compound being a minority group, being bisexual, it adds all sorts of double whammies where you just see those side eyes and you just get really mad. Like Pride, I think June, I'm probably at my most angry. June is like peak anger season because I see this all the time, but I look over and let's say I see Prides in the UK and it doesn't seem to be as big of a thing. But here, there's still that divide that I still don't feel always like I'm 100% welcome. I know I am. But when I go, I know 100% I'm going to get some looks. I might get some comments. I'll get comments from other people of color saying, but that's always for different reasons. It's very frustrating and it's so exhausting because you're hyper aware of it during June. Because we get ignored the rest of the time. That is our life. We're so used to it. But in June, the time where you feel like, oh yes, I can be so extra with my bi-ness, with my queerness, and you just get shut down over and over and over again. You're told, oh no, you don't experience it the same. Well, yeah, I do. It's just people just choose to accept that my struggle isn't as bad. And that's part of the discourse, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like people are more accepting of different relationships depending on what they look like. So, if they look at you and you're femme appearing and you're dating someone who's also femme presenting, they think more valid and you're more welcome in the queer community. And then they see your relationship with maybe a masc presenting person and they don't think it's valid. Both are still entirely valid when you are bi plus and pan. I see, we talk about the discourse and I see these like quirky videos on TikTok and it's usually femme people talk, oh, women are so beautiful and I'm so in love with women but I also like men. Men, gross, ew. Like, they're making a joke out of it as if trying to overcompensate, like queer. Oh yes, we still like men, but we don't class them in the same category. Almost like dismissing and invalidating their own identity for being bi. Like, if your partner is a man, cis man, trans man, masc presenting, your relationship is still entirely valid. Your attraction to that person is still entirely valid and it's still very queer. I really don't enjoy that sort of TikTok discourse that's happening. Maybe not so much with millennials, I don't know, age groups, it's maybe a younger generation. But that's one of the things I really that people are going out of their way to invalidate different types of relationships based on what how people identify and how people look. And I find myself doing it in my head. It's like, so I will ramp up the gayness on certain times if I'm with my partner, like to make sure that everybody knows I'm bi and everybody knows I'm queer. Like, why am I worrying? Why am I caring? But I do care and I really shouldn't. I want people to understand that my identity is valid and this is who I am and I don't want to be dismissed based on what my relationship with one person looks like. So that's what's making me angry this Pride Month. So it's TikToks.
Yeah, we live in a world where people just like to assume things and just like invalidate people, and that's what gets me angry. Like, if you're with someone of the opposite gender or a gender that's not yours, like, to be a bit more inclusive, people might invalidate that, but all relationships are valid, all identities are valid. It's how you when you're in like a homo relationship, people might be more accepting, but they might invalidate like another type of relationship. Like, that's what gets me angry. And being a person with a disability, having a chronic illness as well as being bi, you feel like you're going to get the looks some of the time. But And I could see like how people in minority groups feel that they're not welcome some of the time, but they are, because all identities are valid, all groups are valid. Inside, diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. That's the way I look at it. Like, we're all welcome. We just have to be more accepted in this world.
Yeah, I think for me, I suppose, because we live in such a heteronormative world, and I think we talk about that quite a lot. But I think the thing that I suppose maybe we don't talk about as much, and I mean we in like the wider society, because almost everyone I know who's anywhere under the bi umbrella talks about this all of the time, is we don't only live in a heteronormative world, we live in a world that loves monosexuality. So it's like, we get straight, gay and lesbian makes sense to us. Do you know what I mean? We understand that you like one gender. You know what I mean? You know that we can understand. We get that you like different genders, but you know on a spectrum, there's here and then there's here. And it's like anywhere else along that spectrum, whether they choose to use labels like bisexual, pansexual, whether they haven't labeled it, whether they don't know, whether they're just, whether they just know they're not gay or straight. Just that whole kind of, the rest of us, for lack of a better way of putting it, and nobody knows what to do about it. They're like, no, hang on, no, that's not the boxes we've set up. We've 3 boxes: straight, lesbian, gay. Where are you coming over here from with your, your completely, we have a whole kitchen cabinet, if you know what I mean. They're like, no, we haven't got a box for that. You're just going to have to go away. And again, it's Pride. It's June. These are when those conversations happen. I prefer, in possibly the 1 month where, from my point of view, I would love for it not to be June so I can enjoy Pride Month. Do you know what I mean? I'm aware I sound very angry. So, yeah, I think for me, is, as much as we discuss heteronormativity, can we also discuss the culture of monosexuality that exists?
That is 100% spot on. I think I think it's just a case of people. The simpler something is to understand, the more easily accepted it is. We saw it with gender. We see it all the time with sexuality, even with the way people think. So neurodivergence, neurotypical, we see it all the time with absolutely everything. The simpler it is to understand, the easier it is for people to just comprehend. A lot of people aren't necessarily being ignorant on purpose about it. Some people just have a difficult time grasping because they were told it's one or the other. You can't have both. But they don't realize that they're people who very much would like all the options. So it's very difficult to always be angry at those people. Especially, I found those people I found a lot of the people in my life are older generations. So it's very hard to always be angry at them because at the end of the day, they were raised in a different time. They were raised in a different time. They were told something that was outdated when they were told. And it's just a dynamo effect. And the most I can do is just show them, no, this isn't how it necessarily is. And hopefully they'll come around. Sometimes it happens and it's a win. Sometimes it doesn't. And you just have to cut your losses, And but it's just so difficult sometimes to just explain simply, I don't need to pick. I like it all of it. I don't care. It's the people that count. And for a lot of people, they don't understand that because they think it has to be a physical attraction. There has to be something that you have to connect with there. And I think that's also a wholly different topic on just sexual attraction. It seems that we are very loaded with sexual attraction. There's, it's not really loaded necessarily on romantic attraction to people. It's very sexual, like, okay, well, these two can work, those two can work. But if I don't know what they have in their pants, how can that work? So it adds all these layers of it's just intertangling cables of people not understanding how to put something in a box. But they don't understand that it's just, there's no boxes, it's just a long line of possibility. And it will take some time to get there, but hopefully within my lifetime, please. But hopefully it will get there.
Society is progressing, like, but people still think of now, like, only this is valid or only that's valid. And then the stereotype of bi people liking threesomes is another thing that I've experienced as well. You know, like, just because we're attracted to 2 or more genders doesn't mean we want 3 people in bed with us. So, but yeah, that's one thing I actually hate about the stereotyping at the moment, but it was like, as well as the erasure, that gets my blood boiling.
Yeah, that one.
That's
Oh, sorry. That one I never really understood. It's like, okay, I think it also stemmed from, okay, you like people who are like you like people who aren't like you. You obviously want to have them both at the same time. And how I tend to describe it to people who just can't wrap around, I'm like, okay, you want to have your main course. And you might also want to have something else for your main course. You're not necessarily going to order both things and expect they'll both fit in your stomach. Sometimes you might just be feeling something else. Sometimes you'll be feeling something else. And other times you're happy with what you get. It can be a chef special. It doesn't always have to be at the same time.
I love the analogy with food, but yes, you were totally right.
Food is life. If you use food as an analogy, it tends to work in most cases, because then you're like, oh yeah, huh, never thought of it that way. Because you have people who like different things. So it works with dessert. You might want some profiteroles. You might want a chocolate sundae. And sometimes you might get a profiterole with a chocolate sundae. You know, it works in so many different ways. And it's just trying to explain it to people in a way that they'll understand, but also having to do all of that labor all the time. You have to meet people on their level rather than them trying to meet you on yours. That can be so exhausting. And at the end of the day, I can understand why the gays are angry.
And you all make fairly valid points in terms of the bi erasure at Pride and how frustrating it can be. And sometimes we have to just give up that frustration. Sometimes we don't want to give up that frustration. Like, there's power in queer rage, you know, and you've all brought in very valid points. One thing I will say, we talked a lot about how, and I know we sort of touched on the idea, but we talked so much about the idea that once you're in a seemingly hetero relationship, your bisexuality is erased. But like, talking from experience, 2 femme presenting people get then called lesbians, and all of a sudden my bisexuality is once again erased, you know, this type of way. I might be more accepted into the LGBT spaces, but for the wrong reason. Not for that lovely B, but for the L instead, you know. We have lovely comments coming in. Brandon said for Tendai that you shouldn't be ashamed of yourself. You should be proud if you really are. And when you're talking about going to Pride, and people were taught your story was disgraceful, Paula, about people giving out a Bi Ireland banner being at Pride. And so for those of you listening to us, thank you so much for listening. Feel free to keep commenting. Share your stories in the comments if you want, or if you have any questions for anybody in particular or for the whole panel, feel free to just chime in. one thing we slightly touched on there was specifically by erasure within LGBT organizations, though. Actually, first, hi, Robert. Hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Sorry for being late. Was just stuck in work.
You're grand. Would you like to give us a quick introduction?
Sure. So my name's Rob. I identify as bi plus or pan. Pronouns, I'm happy with he, him, or they, them. I am dyspraxic, but mainly that manifests in me being late for things and walking into door frames. Other than that, it doesn't have a huge impact unless you're trying to read anything I have ever written by hand. That would be the main things, if that helps.
Thank you for being here with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, by erasure in LGBT groups. Anybody have anything you would like to say on this topic?
I think it's just one of those things where people have to keep kicking up a fuss until we're taken seriously. Because it's still that thing of monosexuality. It's a lot easier to comprehend. It's also a lot easier to market as an organization, to say, well, raising funds for this, because you don't have to necessarily do a lot of extra legwork to get people to understand who you're trying to represent. And it's not necessarily just laziness. It's also a lack of diversity within organizations too. People have unconscious bias all the time within the community. It's still there. And it's apparent with how people treat different people of different sexual orientations, gender identities, even with minority groups. Very rarely have I seen any organizations like that have BIPOC people at the forefront. They might have them in the background, but they'll rarely have them at the forefront. And that in itself is also quite confusing because it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's one of those things that makes no sense. And when you say, oh yes, we're an LGBT organization, we cater to everyone except for the B, make it make sense. There's a B there for a reason, you know? And it's just, those organizations, they just need, essentially, people just, at this point, people are always doing stuff when they fear getting cancelled or they fear some sort of consequence or repercussion to them not presenting other people.
When you were talking about it's easier to market monosexuals, it really reminded me of MAREF. So any of us that done any campaigning for MAREF in the Republic of Ireland will know that we were told multiple times that we should not bring up the bi issue, as that would confuse the voters. I know, Polly, you've done a lot for MAREF in your local area.
Yeah. I think that for me, I think I've said this before, so if anyone's heard me speak before, I'm going to sound like a broken record. But that was a really difficult campaign, and it was a really difficult campaign for many, many reasons. And I know I'm not the only one. The issue that took me the longest to get over was the bi erasure. It took much longer. And that went, you know, it was, I suppose, because we were all local groups of a national campaign, there was a head office, there was, you know, I mean, we've seen it with referendums since, if you know what I mean, when we had similar experiences during the, you know, the repeal the 8th referendum, where, again, I've said this as well, trans people were essentially told the same thing. They were once again told, don't complicate the issue. don't scare the voters. And for trans people in particular, that was like the second referendum they'd had to do that. Do you know what I mean? I know there were completely different issues, but I do see the similarities in how the campaigns were run, if you know what I mean. During the marriage referendum, it was very much, don't mention the fact that bi people, need marriage equality. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, well, that seems pretty easy. And they're like, no, don't. And again, it's to go back to, it didn't fit in the box, so we didn't put it on the leaflet. And like, as it stands, marriage equality is a concept. Marriage equality are two words that are inclusive, but they made it marriage equality for gays and lesbians. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what quite a lot of the leaflets actually said. And I'm like, well, you've just complicated the issue yourself. But that didn't get very far. But yeah, so like everyone else, we just got up every day and we knocked on doors and we did what we had to do, and then we went home and we messaged each other going, are you okay? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's I suppose quite a lot of the erasure, I think in general, stems from the unconscious bias towards monosexualities. That for so many people, and for individual people in particular, and because if you get a certain amount of individual people who have an unconscious bias and they become, they set up an organization, that organization carries on their unconscious biases. Do you know what I mean? So, I think for me, I try to remember, and I try to hold on to the fact that structural issues are structural issues. And yes, it takes, many people to make an issue structural. But I suppose to go back to something Tendai said earlier, it's to meet the individual person you're talking to at any given time where they're at. Do you know what I mean? Launching into a speech about, how they were raising you in XYZ way doesn't always help. But a simple question or a simple conversation around, oh, what makes you think that? Or, why do you think that? Or, in the case of a joke that's not funny, I have on more than one occasion been the person in the room who will say, I don't get it, can you explain it to me? Most of the time they will repeat the joke and think that's an explanation, but one or two occasions I have had somebody, when they've tried to explain it, go, oh yeah, okay, well, I can see why maybe that wasn't the smartest thing I said. Do you know what I mean? So it's, I suppose, finding ways of countering the erasure, I suppose, in many ways as it's happening, but also hoping that your other people in the room, and particularly your friends, and particularly people who are not anywhere under the bi umbrella, hoping somebody else does it for you so you don't have to be the one to do it yet again. Do you know what I mean? I'm fine with my reputation as being the one who will call out your biphobia or your bi erasure, but I would quite like if somebody else did it first.
You're totally right, Paula.
Yeah, I totally agree, and like I find myself usually being the only, I have to be the loud, angry one, and reminding people, constantly that we do exist, because it's not even, they get as far as L and G, and then we fall off and we forget the rest of the letter. And it's probably, people talk about bisexuals being confused. It's other people that make it so confusing. I know, my attraction and what my identity is. It's other people who are confused by it. And I feel like we constantly have to come out every time we talk to somebody new, or anytime we go to a new organization. And it's always, I forgot about that. I didn't know that existed. I thought you were X, or I thought you were Y. So you're definitely not the only other angry bisexual in the room at organizations, because I am definitely one of those people, and I do make a point of always including our identity and the umbrella of identities that we have in our organization, because that is the real fact, is that we do get forgotten about. So as much as it is difficult and painful and exhausting for us to constantly be our own self, we still very much need to be our own self advocates, unfortunately, because the people around us still aren't catching up to catch those, hey, that's not right, or that's not inclusive, or hey, do you remember bi+ people? They exist too, right? And it happens a lot in the media, gay marriage, gay pride, everything, and we had the marriage equality campaign in Northern Ireland. Probably, it's on a much smaller scale, and we didn't have a national campaign in the way because we didn't have to have a referendum in Northern Ireland. So we didn't have to go out knocking on doors, but we still had to have those conversations with people in our lives and people in work and, things like that, that yes, this does affect us very much so. We get a law for the gender of our partner. We can get married one way or another or another or another. How does that make sense? And it very much does affect us. So it's just constantly having to affirm that identity exists all the time.
You start to feel like your sexuality becomes performative. Like you have to kind of constantly prove it. And yeah, I had exact same experience, say, in college where, joined a GLB as it was then. That's before the T even got added. That's how old I am. And it was so strange in that I had a girlfriend when I joined. So many people thought I was a poser, that didn't really belong. And I remember getting into a breakup because I got dared. Well, a girl I was seeing was there to kiss a guy to prove that I was bi, and that kind of thing. It just, you find you're constantly trying to prove that you are yourself. And it's so tiring at times. But it's also, you find it so easy just to vanish. It's easier not to rock the boat. It's easier just to let people think what they think.
Yeah, people are going to think what they think anyway. So
Yeah.
like one girl said to me, you look straight. Like, I'm like, I can't even think straight. Never mind sit in a chair straight. I am not straight. but no, like you feel like you have to actually prove yourself all the time. Really, really tiring. But you just let people think what they want, but yourself inside who you are, and it's valid.
Just a few comments are after rolling in. So Moon Aesthetics agrees and says, yeah, it's such a simple concept. Why is it so hard for people to wrap their heads around? Brandon says there needs to be more acceptance within our LGBTQI community. Pepperoni Nipple said, ugh, bi is valid, with a little emoji. And Romney Tree said, until recently, I thought the term sapphic only applied to lesbians. I feel like that's a very common experience. Because I joined a Facebook group full of TERFs and they hated everything to do with men. They told me sapphic didn't apply to me because I liked men too. But I found out that term sapphic is actually for all women who love women, including bi, pan, and lesbian women. I'm so happy I can use the sapphic flag now too, and I feel solidarity with all types of women who love women.
That is definitely something I struggled with in the beginning, because I felt that didn't include me. Calling myself sapphic at all. It didn't include me in any shape, way, or form. And you have that, you get that FOMO. When you see it happening, you're just like, that's me too. But at the same time, you're like, okay, then it's not me, because I happen to like men, or I happen to like someone who is of a completely different gender. It's so invalidating to be told that you're not a part of something because you happen to like this on top of that. The whole people forgetting about your bisexuality is something that grates on me so bad. It happened to me when I came out to my mother. And it was a case of, Mum, I'm going here. I was actually talking about going to the George we were talking about going to the George, and she was like, okay, and what if a girl like wants to dance with you? I will dance with the girl. And what if they want to kiss you? If I want to, I will kiss the girl. Oh, and I'm like, yeah, you've known this for how long? And it's like, oh yeah. You know, and you're just like, I don't forget that you like men. I don't forget that that person is a lesbian. Just because you happen to see me with, the most recent time you remember, you saw me with a man. You've just put me in that category, and your brain has gone, okay, that's the box they belong in. It just makes no sense, and it's so infuriating because people are taking away a part of you, and most of the time they don't even realize it, and they don't know how horrible that can actually feel, how horrible it is to come out to somebody again and again and again, to be like, oh, remember I'm bi. Pride Month comes out and you're super excited, and they look at you like, why are you so excited for it? I'm not straight. Oh yeah. And oh, it is just so infuriating that we have to keep doing that. And like Rob said, like that story of that you had to prove, revolting. And anyone who does that to somebody has a cruelty to them. And I don't think they even realize it. That you're having somebody to prove something to you. Like, nobody has to prove anything to anyone. No one has to answer to anyone.
No, completely. And yeah, I wish I was in that position now so I could say what I wanted to say, what I should have said to them at the time. But yeah.
That is so horrible. Like, it's so sickening. I know I've had to prove, it's weird to have to say this, I've had to prove my blackness. Like, it's very, very apparent. But I've had to prove my blackness because when I was, like, even to now, I didn't necessarily dress how... I was one of those emo goth kids. I was one of those alt kids, and even in my family, I was called the Oreo. And I remember it broke my heart to hear that from a family member. I was like, what? Why would you say such a horrible thing? Being like it, you don't have to be a certain way. It's not, being black doesn't look one way. Being bi doesn't look one way either. Being gay, being a lesbian, being trans, none of it looks a certain way, but people are just so adamant to make it look a certain way so they comprehend it better. So they can be like, okay, I'm okay with that, or no, I'm definitely not okay with this.
Yeah, it's like back to the analogy of food. People might like creamed mashed potatoes, or then they might like rocky hard mashed potatoes, or they might like in between mashed potatoes. But no, people have to make their food look a certain way. Like it's ridiculous.
It's the make it make sense to me so I can digest it better. That is the problem with everywhere within the corporations, within local communities, even within the club scene. People are always wanting the person who is feeling a certain type of way to make it easier for them to digest, rather than them doing a bit more groundwork, them doing a bit more legwork to understand, to listen, process, and understand. It's like, no, I'm not getting it. Make it make sense to me. Bring it to my level. And that is just so... I hate it. I hate it with such a passion.
Like, another thing that I hate, and I used to get this a lot, like not as much anymore, like, but because I'm autistic as well, you know, I tend to, I would go through obviously different special interests, but people would say to me, oh, it's just a phase. It's just one of your special interests. It will go away. I'm like, no, it hasn't gone away since I was 22. I came out during the marriage referendum, like about December before. you know, so that I'd be comfortable helping out like in my local area. But no, it's not just a phase, and no, it hasn't gone away. And it won't go away.
All very fair. Somebody, sorry, my eyes are getting blurred now at this stage, but somebody said that's horrible that somebody in your family called you Oreo, and
Like, it doesn't sound like the worst insult when you think about all the things people have ever been called. Like I've been bullied for my race before, and I've been called far worse. But those
From
slurs,
people you love as well is harder. That's
yeah, 100%. Those slurs hurt a fraction to being called an Oreo. I remember crying in my bedroom, just being like, "What does that even mean?" You know, and it doesn't sound so bad, but when you think about it, as I am Zimbabwean, I'm not Irish, I'm Zimbabwean. I moved here from a very young age. And when I go home now, I'm called the Irish one because of how I speak. You know, I barely have any of my accent left. And going home, being reminded of that, and then growing up, and I was told I was the Oreo because I was white on the inside, based on how I dressed, the music I liked, the group of friends that I had. But the group of friends that I had matched those things, how I dressed and the music I liked, or even the books that I read, all of it, the hobbies that I had. And it was just such a weird feeling. And so around that time of being called an Oreo, I was battling having my sexuality being forgotten about. So it was a lot of emotions all the time as a teenager, being like, oh, gotta remind them that I'm black, and gotta remind them that I'm black. All of these things all the time. And it sucked being called an Oreo. Now I just know that it was just very ignorant on their part, because they didn't even really understand, because they were also shown that it looks a certain way. Being black looks a certain way. You have to listen to certain music, you have to dress a certain way, you have to behave a certain way. And you can't really stay mad at people who didn't really know any better then. Mind you, if someone called me an Oreo today, like Rob, I would have a few choice words for them. But back then, I was young, I was 12, so I cried about it instead.
unfortunately, we have somebody in the comments saying, oh yes, I had experience regarding prove a thing also. It made me angry. I'm so sorry that you also had to experience that, and for any of us that had to experience prove it. Liz says, ain't no phase, baby, I'm born this way. I'm assuming that's to Claire.
My favorite song, by the way. Pride song.
And we've touched on this a good bit now at this stage, in terms of disability, and in terms of BIPOC people's representation at Pride and stuff like this. But so as we know, we have a lot of bi erasure, as we have spent discussing. But even inside the bi umbrella, there is erasure within certain groups. Now, before this happened, before we started tonight, over the last week and stuff, I asked you all about different identities you hold on to and stuff like this. And in no identifying way, I do have a list of just things that at least one person here holds true to them. So mental illness, chronic illness. So we've said a lot about chronic illness. So disability, neurodiversity, chronic pain. In terms of gender representation, we have women, woman, man, non-binary, trans, gender queer. In terms of like relationship sort of standards, we have polyamorous people, monogamous people, married and long-term people. We have people that are in long-term relationships with appearingly opposite gender, as much as we hate that term, opposite gender, and people who have children or take care of children to somebody close in their lives, BIPOC, and African. That is a lot of identities. Just a random list of like 4 questions I asked us, and there's only 6 of us here. And there's a lot more identities we could all climb under, I'm sure. But a lot of these would also interact with our bisexuality. So would anybody like to talk about any of the, because I'm not going to call on any person, because I know what you told me you were comfortable talking about, but I'm not going to assume that you actually are comfortable now in this moment. So if anybody would like to talk about any of their identities and how that relates to their bisexuality, the floor is yours.
I suppose I could maybe go first. Everybody's a bit quiet there. So one of the sort of, if you will, that I identify with is being polyamorous. It was not a term that I had known for most of my life. I came across it when I met my current partner. And I met my current partner through the Bi Ireland, what was then a Slack channel. We used to have a Slack channel. It's like similar to Discord. And it wasn't long after I'd actually joined, and I was like, oh my God, I've never had any real sort of queer community in my life. I was at that point in my life where I was more comfortable in my identity and realized that I had no community around me. I had no friends queer at all. So I went in search of it. I Googled it, and I found my people on Facebook and joined the Facebook group, and then joined channel and met my partner there. And my partner was polyam and identified as polyam, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? And basically, for those who don't know, polyamorous people are people who are comfortable being in more than one relationship at one time, or have the capacity to be in love with more than one person. It's not just about sexual relationships, it's about emotional relationships as well. And once I sort of learned about that and understood that, I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because I had always felt like I had the capacity to be in love with more than one person at the one time. But I had never had the language to, understood what that meant, or what, how that would even. Being bi, people are more likely to assume that you want to cheat on them, or that you're promiscuous or very slutty. Like, there's nothing wrong with being slutty. It's excellent if you want to be slutty. But it's not cool to assume that somebody wants to be a certain way just because they're bi. So, I had all these in previous relationships that I had, but knew that was never something that would have been accepted by my partners at the time. Like, that would not have been a conversation. That would have been a oh, you want me, or oh, you only want to have sex with a woman, or whatever. That was usually like a get out clause, or an entryway into, oh, let's have a threesome type of thing. And for me, it wasn't always like about the sexual side of it. It was about romantic relationships. So that opened up another community, and there is a polyamorous Ireland group as well, and people who might be bi and might be polyam. Not saying that all people who are bi plus are also polyam, but there's crossover it, like many communities that we've mentioned. So that really opened my eyes, comfortable in my relationship and in my identity, that I wasn't tied down to one way that somebody wanted to do, if that makes sense. So in my head, I had the possibility of being with a person of any gender at any time, but the security and the validity of the relationship that I had, which is what I call partner. So my partner and I live together, was also a really important part of my life, and I would welcome, more important people into my life. So that was one of the communities that I found that I think, validated my identity and made me feel more comfortable, and made me meet more open-minded people who were queer, trans, non-binary, and diversified my community in itself. And maybe I'm in a bit of a bi plus bubble now because most of my friends are queer. So I don't often have to worry about other friends, identity or assuming my relationship status, because all my friends are mostly queer and polyam people. So I've built myself a nice little bubble, and I'm so that, yeah, that's one identity that I am comfortable with and has opened up interesting doors in my life. Although pandemic makes everything so much more difficult, and a lot of that recently, it's all been online, which is fantastic. But I can't wait to meet some of the the friends that I've made online in person, and build more on those relationships as well.
Thank you, Hannah. So as Hannah knows, and a few other people here may know, I'm also polyamorous. I'm a relationship anarchist, polyamorous person. And I noticed a very interesting trend in the last 5 years or so in the bi community, which ties into the erasure side of things. So there was this stereotype that all bi people were polyamorous. And as a community, it seemed like we got very good at fighting back against that stereotype, to the point where recently a post came up about polyamory in the Bi Ireland Facebook, and I had loads of polyamorous friends being shocked with me that we allowed people to talk about polyamory, because they just assumed it was an anti-polyamorous space, because bi people couldn't be polyamorous, which we all know is not true. You can be polyamorous, monogamous, whatever you want. But it just was an interesting flip that I saw in the space of about 5 years, that we just had this massive stereotype that people were all polyamorous, to the flip where polyamorous people were afraid to mention they were polyamorous because all bi people must be monogamous. A few comments are coming in here, and then I'll throw it to one of the rest of you. So the fear of, if you say you are poly, you have to prove them right, that you want everything and can't choose. Yeah. I became interested in the concept of polyamory about a year ago, and I think I might actually be polyamorous by identity, not feeling jealousy and attractions to more than one person at the same time. So now that lockdown is coming to an end and we're mingling with each other again, I'm excited to see what comes out of it for me. Good luck on that journey. Yeah, it is an exciting one.
Yeah, one note, just sort of after what you were saying, it all comes back to just don't assume and don't stereotype anyone in your life or any of the people around you. We don't people assume that bi people are all this way or all that way, and we shouldn't have to feel afraid to explore other things around our identity for the fear of the weakly. And that's definitely a fear that I have, being polyam and being bi. And then you also get another negative side of it, what is termed unicorn hunters, and people will unfortunately seek out bi women as threesomes in another couple, because we're inherently seen as just beings that are we must want this thing from these strangers on a dating app. We must want this. This is the most amazing thing. Nobody's ever offered to have a threesome with me before. I must be so taken aback. Like, please. Most people,
it's like what I was saying earlier, like people just think that like we're just because we're bi we want threesomes. No, like no, that's not the case at all.
They forget that we have the capacity for romantic love, and of the queer community as well, because a lot of same gender attraction or similar gender attraction is inherently seen as sexual and not romantic. Worry about, what if children see two men kissing? Oh my goodness, what if children see anybody kissing? It's not any different, but society has deemed it as different and inherently sexual when it's not. Our romantic love is still entirely valid, regardless of the gender and regardless of the relationship identity that you choose to be in.
You're totally right. The over-sexualization of bi people and unicorn hunting, and all the bi mods will know this. But we in Bi Ireland maintain a safe space as much as possible for our community. You all have to answer questions before you are allowed into the Facebook group. All this does. Multiple times a year, we filter out messages in our inbox from people asking, can they use Bi Ireland as a place to seek out a bi woman for a threesome or a bi guy to test out sexual relationships. Multiple times a year. Sexualization of bi people is so prevalent in Irish society. And we do our best to try to shelter our community away from that, because we want Bi Ireland to be a safe space for all our members. But I need to point out the elephant in the room. So one of the most unrepresented things in bisexuality is bi men. And we are very lucky to have a bi man here with us tonight.
Don't know if you're lucky, but it can be, when we're talking about different groups we belong to, I would have huge anxiety issues. And in groups of men, it can be so difficult to decide when it's safe, it's because people see you one way and they assume. And it is so difficult just then to negotiate that as to when to take the risk. And I'm from Ballymun, so growing up, it was everybody's favorite insult was the F word. So, it was the worst thing to be called, to be considered. And kind of coming to grips with that. And then took a long time before I got to the stage where I would even come out and work, because I told myself, job doesn't need to have anything to do with it. They don't need to know. People don't need to know. I can keep it to myself. And I kind of realized that was kind of also a little bit of shame, a little bit of fear that I wasn't necessarily ashamed, but at the same time, I felt like other people would judge me. And it comes back to all of it, whether they would judge me for being promiscuous, which, nothing related to being bisexual at all. That's a separate thing. But if it would come down to being, different, basically. And then also you get that fear of people will treat you different, especially guys, they will. I can say this here, I still haven't come out to my parents. They don't know. I don't think they would judge me. I don't think they would care, but they're in their 70s and I would be afraid of damaging my relationship with my dad, because I know he loves me. I love him. There's no issue there, but I've recently been trying to decide whether or not I should come out, whether or not I should take that chance. And it's because you're hiding a part of yourself away from people who love you. But at the same time, like I said, it's that fear of making the relationship more difficult, making it more awkward, kind of losing something that you have. And yeah, the temptation is to hide. For me, anyway. That's
And can I ask you, Rob,
Mhm.
do you ever, I know this is a stereotype that comes across in media a lot, but all bi men are on the path to being gay. Like, you ever come across that one?
Oh, 100%. I remember like it was one of the first things I think when I was kind of like coming to grips with it myself that my sister said to me. It was a whole, what's the phrase she used was "buy now, gay later." And I remember she thought she was hilarious. Like that hurt me so much. And it is that idea that, and I think part of that does come down to media, does come down to, as particularly my generation anyway, you grew up watching certain TV shows, certain things were represented a particular way in the media. And I mean, like one of the biggest ones for gay representation was Buffy. And literally, with one of the characters in it just switches. And they're one way, then they're another. And it's completely binary. It's completely on or off. And that's how it's always been represented. I know that's changing now, but people grew up with that representation with, and also because, I mean, for a long time, a lot of people had to hide their sexuality. It was illegal to be gay in this country up until far too recently. So a lot of men would have been would have been gay and hiding their sexuality, would have been married to a woman, would have tried to live a life that wasn't conspicuous. And then more and more, as more and more people came out and said, no, I'm actually gay, I'm actually this way. I think society got it into your head, got it that when you come out, you switch. There is no fluidity to it. There is no middle ground. It's one or the other. And for guys in particular, because, well, I say for guys in particular as if it's not a struggle for women, but there's the toxic masculinity aspect of it, which is very, like I said, that's where the difficulty is when you're trying to decide who should know. Because guy friends will treat you very differently. And I don't have many male friends at this point anymore. Pretty much all of my friends are either female or people who I have known for years and really trust. But I find it very difficult to make male friends. And it is just that space of, do I fit in? Do I want to fit in at times as well in certain circumstances, obviously? But it's, yeah.
I understand. Because as you very kindly came to the rescue only last night, Rob, because I really struggled to get a man to come on, which I totally understand. This is a scary thing to do, and a lot of people were afraid of outing themselves and all this. But it was much easier to get people that were non-binary or women than it was to get men to come on. And and it's sad for male representation in our community. So thank you so much for Vichy taking the text at like 9 or 10 o'clock last night and taking it on for us. We have a few comments here. Somebody, Rama Tree says, I feel like so many bi people pass as straight all their lives because it's easier. And Kinkyo Dasu says, I think it also comes from the fact that there are quite a few bi men that get in gay relationships and start calling themselves gay because it's easier. I had gay people panic when they felt attractions to females because then their mother was right, they hadn't found the one. So for some, it is also just easier to label themselves gay all the way when they're not. Fitting in a group of straight people is an act kind of hard, even for me as a female, but I'm sure it's even hard for males. Thank you to all our commenters.
I find that really interesting as well, because for people who are binary genders, for bi women, they're usually just seen as straight, and bi men are usually just seen as gay. And it's interesting because it's like identities are geared towards the attraction of men, and it's really strange. You know, they don't assume that women with a man or a woman, sorry, they don't think, oh, that bi woman hasn't met the right woman. It's she hasn't met the right man, you know. It's just really and one of the things
I think men are like, society wants men to come across a certain way, like, and that's where like a lot of the toxic masculinity comes in. And you know, it is starting to change a little bit, but like it's something that men have to put up with, that non-binary or gender fluid people or women don't have to put up with. And you know, like one of the stereotypes for women is like, oh, all women have a little bit of biness in them. You know, like, so like you get that as well. And that's something like that, you know, we have to put up with as well, I guess. But it must, like, I do feel for bi men, because you know, they can't be them true selves if they're in either or relationship. You know, like they might be in a straight or a straight looking relationship, and you might go, oh, he's too gay to be in that relationship or something like that. So like, you know, and then the opposite way around as well, or he's too straight looking to be in a homo relationship, like.
Yeah. And Hannah, I totally agree. That is my number one rant, that all relationships apparently lead to men. Well, normally said in less savory words, but it is so true. Thank you so much. Tendai, Paula, Claire, would any of you like to speak about your experiences? Yeah, Tendai, go for it. You and Paula to start it at the same time, but you go for it.
Awesome. So for me, it's navigating bisexuality as a Black African it's been fairly okay for the most part, mainly because of where I happen to be living. But I know if I was still in Zimbabwe, things would be very different, because a lot of African nations still do criminalize homosexuality. And I myself have known people to hide their sexual orientation because it wouldn't fly, it wouldn't be accepted. And even if they did come out, there's terrible practices out there to correct it. I'm not going to name them. I'm pretty sure anyone who is interested could Google it, and it is horrific. And it still goes on to this day, and it's just so upsetting that in a way, I am in a place of privilege, and that here in Ireland, I can be a bit more open and out with my authentic self. But if I went home, that wouldn't necessarily be the case for me. because it would be quite dangerous. It can be very dangerous depending on all sorts of circumstances. It can be like that, and it just hurts so bad because I know there's so many people. There are still prides in those countries, don't get me wrong. There's still pride in those people are still happy to go out, be themselves, live their true selves, but it's a risk. It's a very big risk for them. And the mind boggles when you think, how in this day and age is that still happening? And how long will it take until that isn't the norm anymore? Because that is still currently very much the norm. Being homophobic, very much the norm. Criminalizing anything like that are very much the norm. And people have to move in secret. And that can be so damaging. Like, that has so many terrible, terrible effects on people's mental health. And that's a whole new kettle of worms, you know? And it's just so upsetting to see that that's still happening. But within the bi community itself, navigating that as a person of color, yes, I've been targeted by the dreaded unicorn hunter as well. Not only is my bi-ness fetishized, so is my blackness too. I've gotten the comments of, oh, I've never tried a black person. Like I'm literally a chocolate bar, you know? And it's just so dehumanizing in that way that I'm almost like a conquest for some people. And then, of course, when they find out that I'm bi, it's like, ooh, yes, you know, we hit the jackpot here. And that in itself, it's so disgusting. And within the community here in Ireland, there is quite a prominent Black queer community, but there's always a need for spaces for BIPOC people within the much larger communities. So I'm part of Bi Ireland. I have been for a long time. A lot of my friends have been volunteers, mods within it for years. I don't even know when I started volunteering for it, to be honest. But within that, I'm also part of smaller BIPOC queer groups, because your journey through bi-ness is quite different from mine. And although we do understand each other on so many different levels, there are some aspects you'll never get. And for me, it's easier for me than to try and keep explaining over and over and over again why it's important that I see people like me being represented. It's much easier to have those safe spaces for myself to go to. And it's not a case of, oh, they'll never understand, or I don't feel really welcome. I feel so welcome in Bi Plus. So welcome, but I also feel welcome in those other spaces too, because I don't have to explain things to people as much. It's exhausting to be bi and having to explain, but also within the bi community to have to be Black and having to explain too. It's like I never just get a chance to just be queer and Black and live life. I always have to find a way to make it easier for people to digest. It's like when the whole movement picked up last year with Black Lives Matter, having to explain that. I've spent so much time online explaining that to people. I got so severely burned out. But having to explain that to people was exhausting. So that compounded on then having that rolling into June, and then also having to explain, oh, I don't see people who look like me being shown, like with the marriage ref. I'm not sure I saw any materials really that had a lot of BIPOC people, and that was upsetting because I did a lot of work for that too. But it's almost as if queerness has a certain look and it's not brown. Anything that's past a certain tan, a certain shade of tan, it's just ignored because people just aren't willing to accept it. Within some Black communities, homophobia is still a thing. it's still not easily accepted. But then within those communities, you have much bigger queer communities where chosen families are just as important. And it happens everywhere. Queer communities and queer families are such a big thing, but having to explain that every day, or having to explain that there's a social, racial injustice issue linked in with inequality in that way, it just gets so draining sometimes that it's easier to just run off to the safe space of the internet and be like, okay, I can just take a breather, not have to think about anything. And also talk to people who also do come from an African background, that people are literally being murdered for being gay, and it hurts to not being able to do anything about it. But then you're living somewhere where leaps and bounds, marriage ref went through, everybody was delighted, but still you're not seeing anyone who looks like you. So where do you belong there? It's a very polarizing place to be.
It's
Sorry, carry on, Gura.
sorry. No, I was gonna say it's like being like having a disability. People like look at people with disabilities as, oh, they're so innocent. Never mind, like, yeah, they just not able. Then when you mention sex and disability, then it goes into
Fair.
a complete different kettle of fish altogether. But just because
Claire,
we have, yeah.
we will get to you in a moment. We will talk about disability, but of all the topics here we could be discussing, let's not be the white people speaking over the Black person while they're talking about the lack of race diversity in the LGBT community, okay? But we will get onto disability in a moment.
I was trying to make a similarity, but it's okay.
And
I totally hear that. I understand that similarity, because that is something that I've noticed as well, in that people with disabilities are seen as non-sexual people. And again, that is something that still will also touch BIPOC people on the same sort of level, and a bit deeper because of systematic oppression as well. It's just it's really strange to try and navigate these waters all the time, because you're never sure. Like going to Pride, it's always will I be safe? Obviously, will I be safe on a bi level, but also on a race level? Because there are still racist queer people around, and you never know who you're going to be safe with. That's why you always surround yourself with people that you know, or you march with those BIPOC groups because 100% within them you don't have to second guess yourself. Whereas if I march with Bi Ireland, I'm comfortable because I've been here for such a long time, but I never know that if somebody who's just attending is like that, is going to be a certain way towards me because of how I look. So I'm dealing with a double-edged sword in terms of sexuality and race, and trying to find balance between both and not lose my mind at the same time. I know I've said, oh my God, I've said tired so often throughout this whole thing. And that's just the truth. I'm very Black, very queer, and very, very tired all the time now. And also bi-furious. Bi-furious indeed. And it's just, that's become almost like a default, because I'm always having to be vocal, always having to talk about there's this, but also there's that. So when you talk about rainbow capitalism, I'm pretty sure everybody saw that around the time Black Lives Matter became a big thing, all of a sudden everybody started posting models who were brown, Black, when they never would have done stuff like that before. So there's so many parallels between the two communities. But at the same time, sometimes those communities just overshoot each other and they just don't connect. And it's so heartbreaking, because you just think, won't people just look and see where we're so similar, but also understand that I need my own spaces. And it's not me excluding you, because we had to create those spaces when we weren't included in yours. And having to explain that to people who refuse to understand, it's exhausting. It's like, we have queer communities for a reason, because heterosexual communities excluded us. So it's natural that there would be BIPOC communities, because queer communities can still be quite racially biased and less willing to accept. A lot of people are not willing to accept that I am in any shape queer because I don't look, because I'm not white. They're like, really? Because they don't see it. They don't see it, so they don't know it's a thing. So that's where a lot of my Africanness, BIPOCness, and bisexuality overlap. It's trying to be very visible in a way that people understand that, yes, we do exist. We've always existed. Like a lot of people, oh, Pride, they'll go to Pride, they'll be happy. But they will never consider Marsha. You know, in that way, just like, how could you always go to Pride, always be so proud, you know, you're going there. It started with people who look like me, but we are always erased too. In that dialogue, we are always erased. We're always looked over. And then when we speak up, there's always a rhetoric that we're angry. We have cause to be angry. White people can be angry, but they're not seen in such a negative way. It's seen as passion. You know, they're impassioned by injustice, but if I start speaking on it, it's almost given darker meaning. Darker meaning. That was not intended, but it's given a much harsher sweep of the brush just because I happen to look the way I look. And by encouraging understanding within these queer spaces, that trickles down to absolutely everything. It touches on everything. And you'll see a lot of queer people are very passionate about issues to do, like what Claire said, to do with disabilities, and same thing with BIPOC people, because we all understand the struggle. The struggle is just slightly different from each and every one of us, but we're all there to fight for everybody else because we know how much a single voice can add to the growing numbers and make a difference. So that's why when I got an opportunity to volunteer, I noticed that there was a lack of diversity in the mods. And I wanted people to know that it was a safe space, that they could join, they could find people, because not everybody will know that there is a BIPOC group that they can join. There's so much online now. It's not as easy to find all these little groups. And if somebody happened to stumble upon Bi Ireland, I wanted people to be like, oh, okay, I can join that group. It will be safe for me to do so. Because there are 100% other groups that I would avoid, because I've seen how they carry on, how they talk over minority voices, how they talk over minority ethnic groups. And that's just, there's too much of that going on in day-to-day life that we don't need it online.
Thank you.
Nice.
Hearing all that with us. Yeah, it shocks me the amount of people that don't remember Marsha. So that Beauty Stonewall movie didn't help, where they totally gave Marsha's role to a white gay guy. So, but comments, we have, did you know Billie Holiday was bi? They actually showed her female partner in the latest movie about her. I was very excited. Billie Holiday is actually one of the artists on the Bi Ireland Spotify playlists. And Brandon says, I love this panel talking and discussion about different topics. Each and everyone should be extremely proud for yourselves. To be honest, I see you as an amazing and beautiful person. Um,
Thank you.
Paula, I think you were next.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I've been I suppose the biggest intersection for me is actually with my sexuality and my mental illness. I live with bipolar 2 disorder. One of the symptoms of hypomania is hypersexuality. I have had more than one medical profession question if I would ever be able to know, because it's in my chart that I'm a bisexual woman. They're like, would you recognize the signs? And I'm like, oh, it literally took me a minute. I was like, in my head, I'm going, what's happening? And I'm like, oh, right, yeah, they think hypersexual is my default setting. They don't think I'd notice. Like, setting aside the fact there were many other signs of hypomania, if you know what I mean, and not everyone would experience hypersexuality in the first place. The default assumption was, well, sure, that's just your baseline. You'd never figure out you were ill. And I'm like, on many reasons that's wrong, but also if you genuinely thought that, you're not really going about it the right way to help me, are you? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it's things like that that I don't think I ever expected. Like, I've had doctors over the years query whether I needed certain things done. Smear tests. Like, people have gone, well, if you only sleep with women, you don't need a smear test. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. I made that face too. Do you know what I mean? I actually like, you know, I was like, okay, you're wrong. I can look it up on the internet and show you now why you're wrong. Or you can insist you're correct, but I would like you to chart that I've told you were wrong. If you know what I mean. In the end, I ended up contacting, like, you know, I figured it out myself and essentially went back to them with it already organized, going, see, I do need a smear test. But and I think it's things like that I suppose, I don't know, I don't think, this goes back to, I suppose, my thing. Straight people don't come out to their doctors typically because everyone's assumed to be straight. So you don't realize how much, you don't think of it as having an impact, because it most likely doesn't, for the simple reason their default setting is everyone's straight, and it's only when you have to explain that maybe you're not maybe you're not, that you're actually not, that suddenly you see the impact it has, if you know what I mean. Like, so I've found myself in situations where I've been sitting in appointments with Google open, you know, in places where I really do not want to have to be the person doing the educating, because I'm like, I'm ill, I'm here for a reason, if you know what I mean. I have found myself having to, you know, meet the doctor where they're at, even though I do not want to, and explain, like, yeah, I see what you're saying, but here's where you've got that assumption from, and why it's an assumption, and why, particularly in the case of the hypersexuality thing. I'm like, if your default setting is that your bisexual patients are hypersexual by nature, that's actually quite a dangerous stance to have, because A, it means you wouldn't, do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm like, you've essentially just told me that one of, you know, I mean, again, it is because, I mean, there are, like, why, you know, I suppose mania and hypomania, you know, manifest so differently for so many people. But like, doctors do have a 5-point bullet list, and hypersexuality is like one of the top 2, if you know what I mean. And I'm like, if you're approaching patients with a default setting of that possible symptom will not apply because they wouldn't never be able to tell, I'm like, that's, I'm struggling, because I struggled when it happens, and I still struggle. I'm like, we have such you know, a mental health crisis in this country, and it can take so much to acknowledge the different mental illnesses in the first place, to then find yourself with I don't know, if you've ever tried to get help in the first place, that in its own right is a whole thing. To then, if you find yourself in a position where you're able to receive a diagnosis, and in my case, it wasn't an unexpected diagnosis, but it was one that took a while for me to get. So it was relief, if you know what I mean. And then to be confronted with a person who had all of these assumptions. And like, when you know, it had never occurred to me to not mention my sexuality. But then I was like, well, maybe I should have kept quiet. And then I'm like, well, no, because that's not what you do. But then when trying to explain it to other people afterwards, they're going, why were you talking about your sexuality with your doctor? And I'm like, yeah, you see, and you know what I mean? And I'm like, because otherwise they would have assumed I was straight. And in certain circumstances, it can be relevant information. Like, you know, in the case of, do I need a smear test? If I'm getting an STI check every year, they, for some bizarre reason, won't do certain STI tests unless, do you know what I mean? There are certain circumstances where it is actually, I'm like, you know, I'm like, it's relevant information. It's quite important. But like, the one place I don't want to have to explain myself is in a doctor's office. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I find it baffling, but I never know how to, you know, what to do. Like, there's only so much any individual patient anywhere can have a chat with their own doctor. But somewhere on some level, there's some kind of training that is failing, probably insofar as there is no specific training. That's probably the failure, as opposed to the training exists and it's not great. It's Ireland. Chances are it doesn't exist. Do you know, I don't know. I'm just assuming. Do you know what I mean? But it's things like that. It's, I suppose, places I never expected it to be. I won't say an issue, but for it to be a difficulty insofar as you find yourself back in explaining mode. You find yourself back in, you know, counteracting stereotypes mode. When that's not really what you want to be doing when you've gone to the doctor. Because like, I'm not there for the fun of it. There's a reason why I made the appointment. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can have that conversation with somebody somewhere else on a different day. But there are, I suppose, places where the impact of not having that conversation, like if I hadn't have said anything, like I'm not sure me saying anything had an effect. That, you know, the mental health system, you know, in general, probably still has similar reactions. I'm not saying I fixed anything, because I didn't. But not saying anything would have been worse, because I would have, by not saying anything, I would have agreed with the doctor. They would have just gone, oh yeah, okay, well, fair enough. They kind of, you know, by not saying anything, I agreed with their stance, that their default setting of hypersexuality being a thing, you know, and I'm like, we're there again. Do you know what I mean? It's that stereotype. But I'm also, you know, it's that everyone is the same, and everyone is this way, and everyone is that way, and all bisexual people are this, you know, like, hypersexuality isn't always a bad thing, but it is also not a sexuality dependent thing. And that was my issue, if you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean? Like, in the context, I suppose, because I have a bipolar disorder, or, you know, disorder diagnosis, in that particular context, we were speaking of hypersexuality as a symptom. But it's not a symptom all of the time for all of the people. Do you know what I mean? But also, it's not sexuality dependent. So it's not like all straight people are X and all, you know, gay people are Y and all bisexual people are, well, everything according to this particular doctor. Do you know what I mean? So it's just places where, I suppose, that's been the biggest place where I didn't expect it to become. I think it was an intersection I wasn't aware of until it happened. It hadn't occurred to me. Do you know what I mean? That people would, you know, would see it that way. That, you know, I suppose I'm so used to stereotypes, but I don't think in my head I've made the connections that would be a place where that particular stereotype would occur. Do you know what I mean? And then you never know, you know, because you don't always see the same doctor, so you never know if you're going to have the same conversation again when the doctor goes through, you know, how have you been since your last time, and you go through the whole thing. And it's just, yeah, it makes even going to the doctor, depending on why you're at the doctor in the first place, you know, I suppose it's just another place you have to be always on, insofar as being ready to explain something.
Gotcha. And as somebody with BPD and has to attend mental health doctors and stuff, I'm under like psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a mental health nurse is my therapist. And I was very shocked. I love my mental health nurse. I love her so much. because I was so shocked that she's actually accepting of the fact that I'm trans and bi and polyamorous, because I'm so used to health professionals not accepting that type of stuff. And she uses my actual name instead of my dead name, and it's like she uses they pronouns, and like that makes me so excited. And it's really sad that I get so excited that healthcare professions treat me with basic human kindness. And she doesn't assume anything about my sexuality is because of my mental health issues, whereas I have had that same thing with the mental health doctors where it's like, oh, but are you sure it's not the BPD that has you this way? And it's like, I'm pretty sure, like, that only develops in late teens. I've been like this my whole life, so I get you. And there is not enough training in the HSC, unfortunately, when it comes to LGBT patients. I apologize for that. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Paula.
No, there's not enough training at all.
No. Claire, last but certainly not least, would you like to talk to us about something?
Well, I have a rare form of epilepsy, and I also have autism, and that's also a big part of my identity, which, with my bisexuality as well. And as Paula was saying, like, you feel like you have to explain yourself to the doctors over and over and over again, and because of having a disability, people think that you're innocent. And they think like, oh, she wouldn't, never mind. But then when you tell them they're bi, they're like, you're bi, you get this look off people, and you're like, but that's just the way I am, like. And then I'd get oh, it's just a phase thing. No, it's not just a phase, it's who I am. I've always been this way. I'll be like this way, I'll be this way till the day I die. And people think that people with disabilities are just so innocent and that they can't even consent. And there's a lot of stereotypes out there that I have to face, and that many people have to face on a daily basis, being LGBTQ plus and having a disability. That's why Full Spectrum was founded, to help people in this who have those issues. And doesn't matter what type of disability you have, you can still, that space is a safe space for me. And then Bi Plus Ireland is a safe space for me. So there's disability spaces and there's queer spaces. And then you have the combination of the two with Full Spectrum. And I feel very safe because I know I'm not going to face those stereotypes, in each group. But it can be so draining on a daily basis, having to explain yourself to people over and over and over again.
Yeah, I understand, Claire. No, I'm in Full Spectrum also. Claire is one full member of the steering group. I'm just an ordinary member that shows up each week. The few weeks I've been there. But it is nice to have a space for disabled queers to come together and be able to. Last week we spent most of the time talking about what would our ideal pride look like, because so much of pride is not accessible.
Exactly, and that's another reason why it was founded, because for a lot of I'm not sure of the exact stat, but a lot of disabilities are invisible, they're not shown. So like, there's an access issue for me mightn't be an access issue for you, Claire, and vice versa. People have different disabilities, and their disability affects them in different ways. And we need to try and be as inclusive and, you know, accepting of everybody. And we need queer spaces, especially here, you know, to be accepted. Like when I saw the picture of Panty Bar earlier on, I saw it was on the wheelchair spot and I went, but then later on I found out that the wheelchair spot was moved to the next spot. So I was glad about that. At least then, you know, people with disabilities and the parking and the access is still there.
And then in terms of neurodiversity, Claire would know this with me. A lot of times in autistic groups, we're met with a lot of confusion anytime we mention our sexualities or stuff. We have people just questioning, what the hell does that mean? And you're constantly having to defend yourself. Then especially as trans person, the amount of transphobia that this is just from ignorance. It's not even malice, it's just pure ignorance in the groups. But that within itself can cause difficulties. Because you walk into these groups and you're like, okay, leave my sexuality at the door. Let's pick up my neurodiversity. Leave my neurodiversity at the door, pick up my queerness. That's not how these things work. That's not where we are like, we can't.
No, and to see the hate in the groups as well, you know, the transphobia, the homophobia, sometimes it really angers me in neurodiverse spaces. Yes, we all have different brains and think differently, and hence the concept of neurodiverse, but there's no reason for all the hate, and I don't understand people sometimes.
But thank you all so much for sharing your stories and sharing those little parts that are more race. I think everybody that has watched it and will watch this will come away having learned something. And I do thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you to our wonderful people watching and giving comments. We have a new comment saying many icons have had their sexuality erased, either being presented as straight or as gay. That is so true. Freddie Mercury, anyone? Freddie Mercury, for all of you out in YouTube land, we have a Freddie Mercury statue in Dublin by Ireland that we put on the table so people know it's a by Ireland event without it looking like a by Ireland event. So you can still be like, you don't have to be out to be at any of our events. But yes, that's our little icon on the table, just so people know they're at the right table. But yes, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to all our lovely speakers. And before I let our speakers get the last words in, I want to let people know we talked about a lot today. The reason I put this on so early is so normally a lot of Bi Ireland events happen at 8 o'clock. The reason I put this on is 6 o'clock was so we could all go and breathe afterwards and do whatever self-care we need to do to let go of this anger and this sadness and this rage that we may be feeling just because of the conversations we have. And I want everyone to know out there in YouTube, we talked a lot about this idea of confronting people and correcting them, about telling them what being bi means in a gentle manner and stuff, and sometimes not so gentle manner, whatever way is your way. But just so you know, there is no obligation to do that as a bi person. There is no obligation. If it does not feel safe, it does not feel comfortable, or you're just too tired, you don't owe the community an obligation. However, To the rest of our lovely rainbow family, please pick up the slack and help us point out all this. And especially to our straight allies, please pick up the slack and help us out so we don't have to get exhausted explaining all this. There's loads of research, there's loads of resources, there's loads of snapshots of one-liner explanations. Just go get them, take the load off us. And to the bi people again, just so you know, we're talking about bi erasure. And a lot of times when we talk about bi erasure in the peer support group that happens monthly, we often come across people that then talk about how they are so sorry that they're contributing to the erasure by not coming out. You are under no obligation to ever come out to anyone in your life. If you don't tell a single soul, that is okay. If you tell 10 people and nobody else, that is okay. Never come out if you don't feel safe and comfortable to do it. You are not contributing to bi erasure. It's companies and LGBT organizations and media that give bi erasure, not individual bi people for not coming out. Never put yourself under that obligation. And finally, to anybody out there that's listening, that's over 18 and finds themselves under the bi umbrella, attracted to 2 or more people, know that you are bi enough. Come join Bi Ireland. You doesn't matter if you're a parent, it doesn't matter if you're a person of color, if you are trans, if you are a member of the traveling community. And I mention all these different types of labels because these are the types of labels that I have come across people saying, I can't join because I am X. I don't care if you only realized you're bi last week. I don't care if you're ace with your pan-romantic. You are welcome at Bi Plus Ireland. We have our Discord, we have our Facebook group, we have Zoom meetups on a regular, at least twice a month. And for the month of June, we have 4 more scheduled for the month of June, and then loads more until the end of August, because as we know, Pride does not stop until the end of August in Ireland, and then some in September as well, because then we're into bi Pride season. So you're gonna be stuck with a lot of me on Zoom until the end of September. But come join. You are bi enough to be here. I promise. Just be literally all you have to think is I am bi plus, and then you're bi enough. I don't care if nobody else knows that you're bi plus or not. And that's all my little statements. I am gonna throw it out to each of our participants to say their final last words. If they want to say goodbye, tell me how awful of a night they had, or if there's anything they want to shamelessly plug. So I'm just going to go by my screen order here. So Rob, do you want to kick us off?
Yep. First off, I just want to thank you for inviting me to take part. I know it was last minute, but really, really grateful for the chance. And yeah, it has been a heavy conversation, I think, for everybody here. But the one thing I do want to say is that yeah, we all have our own struggles, whether it's with masculinity, race, gender, neurodiversity, everything. But the one thing I will say is we're all united in love, that it's not all negative, that we're all here because we can love somebody regardless of what they are. Never mind who they are, it's what's in their pants doesn't matter. And that's what it means to me anyway. And I will let someone else talk.
Thank you, Rob. Tendai?
I don't have a whole lot to say. Like Rob pretty much said everything that I intended to say as well. It's probably what I want to say is it's okay to feel tired. It's okay to not be vocal. It's okay to protect your peace. You don't have to prove who you are. Anyone who asks you to do so you should reevaluate your relationship with that person for sure. Because anyone who makes you jump through hoops to prove what you know deep down in your heart that you are isn't doing it for your sake. They're doing it for their own sake. And sometimes selfish people are just that. They're just selfish people. So just be yourself. If that means not coming out ever, you don't owe that vulnerability to anybody. If that means coming out to everybody in the most public way possible, absolutely go big or go home. Do what you need to do. Just look after yourself. Be mindful of how much you're throwing out there. Be mindful of how you are feeling. Check in with yourself, because being part of this community can be so draining at times. And if you're part of different overlapping communities, that is compounded even more. So just look after yourself and do what you need to do to be you. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So before I move on, Senna, I will just say I am plugging this for you because you have done amazing work on behalf of Bi Ireland with Rooted in Africa and Ireland RAIN network. So if everybody goes like them on social media, amazing project to go follow, and we are very grateful for their link in with Bi Ireland and for being that liaison for us.
Oh, and just to say, they are available on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. And they're also holding their own panels and stuff during this month, and they've been doing so for the last couple of months as well. And it'll mean a lot to just have the support of allies to uplift minority voices too. Thank you. I forgot. I always get really flustered at the end. I'm like, and then I forget all the things that I intended to say.
That's fair. Hannah.
I just want to say, thank you so much to Keir for hosting. You always do such a wonderful job of being so organized and keeping us all together. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody else on the panel. I thought it was a great discussion. Some really wonderful insights, intersections that we all face. And although we talked a lot about probably a lot of the negative things, there is so many positives about being bi and being part of the bi plus community, and this community so much. And if you want to join us, please do. It is such a wonderful space. This space, I've been able to meet my partner, all my friends, and do some of the best things I've done in my life in the past few years. So yes, thank you to all the wonderful Bi Plus people who make this community. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Hannah. And you're right, we did have a lot of happy conversations. That was the title of tonight, but you're right, there is a lot of positivities, and that's what we're going to have to do in September now. It's just a positive panel of everything great. Paula.
Yeah, to echo Hannah, particularly, I just want to thank you for your hosting. We'll go with hosting because I was struggling to think of another word. For keeping us, I suppose, not in check, but I'm rambling, you see, which is what I'm trying to say is you made us not ramble as much. But also, I'd like to say to, I suppose, anyone who is in that space where maybe they know themselves that they're bi, or somewhere under the bi umbrella, but they haven't told anyone other than themselves. you're out to one person, you're out to yourself. You may never feel like telling anyone else for a variety of reasons. Don't ever feel like you have to. You know I've spoken personally tonight about, I don't know if you can hear the dog currently, they're scratching on the mat beside me. Erwin, sorry, they were in a different room up till now. But I know I in particular have spoken a lot about how I'm comfortable being the shouty, angry bisexual woman who's telling you why you're wrong. I do it so other bi people don't have to if they don't want to. To echo Ciara earlier on, I'll always say to the rest of, particularly the L and the G from the LGBT community, because I do understand that trans people have their own explanations they don't want to be giving. I will kind of expect other people to step up, but it's not on any bi person, pan person, or any other identity under the bi umbrella to do anything other than be themselves. Just I am aware that tonight I made it sound like you should all be as shouty as I am, and don't. Seriously. If that's not your nature, if you don't want to, don't. But also, if the only person you're ever out to is yourself, that's perfectly fine as well. Just on the plugging thing, if I could just plug Scene in Kerry, who they're like a newish group. I say newish because I'm not sure whether it was 2019 or 2020 when they started, because time. Pandemic does strange things to time. They are a new kind of social group for LGBTQ people in Kerry, because with Pride not happening for a few years, there kind of wasn't, a group. And while currently during the pandemic, all of our stuff has been online, the plan is to get back into, social events where you can be around people, where hopefully you do not have to do any explaining. So if people could like and subscribe and follow us we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's Scene in Kerry. SCEEN is how Scene is spelled. It's seen as in to see. It's just kind of what they went with. It's just, I think for me, because I'm from Dublin, but having moved to a rural area, I've realised over the years how important community is, locally as well. And while currently even that's online, sometimes just being in the same room as people is nice.
Thanks, Paula. And Claire.
Yeah, so I've kind of done my plugging already, but Full Spectrum are a disabled LGBT group. They were only founded this time last year. So we're coming up to our 1 year anniversary soon, but we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There are so many positives to being bisexual, is what I want to say as well. We're all human beings. It doesn't matter like whether you're a person of color, disabled, bi, trans, whatever. We're still all human beings, and we're all going to the one place at the end. So that's like, just be kind to each other and don't just be yourself. Because that's all you can be. Don't try to pretend to be anybody else or silence yourself if you don't want to. Like, just be yourself, and once you're out to yourself, it doesn't matter whether you're out to one person, 10 people, 100 people, or gone viral on the internet. You're still you, like, and that's all you can be.
Thank you. And final plug-in. Rainbow Autistic Ireland. If you're autistic and fall under the rainbow banner.
I was going to mention that, but I thought I'd let you mention that.
You're right. We only set up in February because I got fed up. I got fed up with the Discord in autistic groups. But I will let our commenters have the final say, because we have a few comments left. So we have, thank you so much for a very interesting panel. Good thinking. I think that's regarding the positive panel, but I'm not 100% sure. I lost track, to be honest. So true. Once again, thank you so much for speaking now honestly about your struggles and your own personal experiences. Thank you to all the speakers. You all did amazing, and what beautiful words. So thank you and good night from all of us here and from Bi Ireland. I hope everybody has a happy and safe